Okay, we are live. Welcome, everyone. Today we have with us Dr. Basil Wahn. He has studied his bachelor, master, and PhD level of cognitive science at the University of Osnabrück. So he's a born and bred Coxie. He works on the topics of multisensory integration, social cognition, visual attention, um, and I'm really looking forward to his talk today. Basil, please go ahead.
Thank you. So I titled this talk today, How to Divide a Task, Labor Division and Interpersonal Coordination. Actually advertised was a different title, but I in the end decided to go for this talk because there are more data in it and less theory. So I hope you will like it. But first of all, as Ashima already said in her nice introduction, I actually spent a lot of time in Osnabrück, 10 years, and I feel it's good to be back, if only virtually. Actually, I'm one of those survivors who also studied in the AVZ until it wasn't safe anymore. Then I moved to Canada, Vancouver to be precise, for about 2.5 years to do my postdoc there. And I recently returned to Germany, and I'm now in Hanover. So let's get started with this talk. In daily life, we often perform tasks jointly. For instance, when carrying a sofa together, when making music together, or when searching for a friend in a crowd. In these tasks, we often coordinate our actions to attain a shared goal. Often we coordinate our actions also in these tasks by dividing the labor. So for instance, when you're looking at the sofa example, we divide the labor, so the weight of the sofa, by having each character carry one end of the sofa. As I recently learned here in Hanover, there are also more creative ways to carry a sofa, as you can see in this picture here. And I have to say, you cannot see this in the picture, but this person is also wearing flip-flops while doing that. So there's a lot of creativity and joint action also here in Hanover. In this talk, I want to focus on the task of a joint visual search task. So to make you familiar with that kind of task, I want you to all perform a joint visual search task. Your task will be to find your friend named Waldo. So once you see him, I will show here several people. You need to scream in your mic, Waldo. So please get ready, and here we go.
Waldo.
Okay, very good. So in this social distancing edition of Where's Waldo, this task is particularly easy. Now I'm going to show you a bit more natural, or as it used to be natural setting, where you have a big crowd of people and again need to find Waldo. So the task, this is now your second try, is still the same. So make yourselves ready, and here we go. Mind that my talk time is limited.
Ich habe ihn, Waldo.
Okay, so where did you see him?
In the upper corner on the right side. There,
Perfect.
holding.
Yeah, you got it. Good job. So here's Waldo. So you just all performed a visual search task together, finding your friend Waldo. But also there are several other visual search tasks that you may perform in daily life. So for instance, when you misplace your wallet or key, you may try to search for it together. But there are also several professions, like in airport security, where people need to perform visual search tasks on a daily basis, or also in medical contexts. A first question that you can ask when you investigate joint visual search tasks is whether groups can search faster than individuals. So in other words, whether there's a group benefit in performing a search task together. When you study this task in a lab, things become a bit more abstract. So instead of finding Waldo, you look for a circle. So Waldo becomes this little circle here, and which you need to look for among these director objects. When participants do such a task in a lab, they often tend to divide the labor. So for instance, one participant may take the left side, so search on the left side, and one will search on the right side. If you look at these label divisions, what also may occur is that participants may search part of the screen redundantly, so the label division may not be as efficient as possible. What another factor what one could also consider is the individual's search abilities. So in other words, does the better member also take a larger search space? These questions I will address also in this talk now. But what an initial study has now found when investigating joint visual search is that when you provide each of the co-actors with gaze information, so where the other co-actor is currently looking on the search display, then this really helps you to efficiently divide the labor. And of course, this helps you also to attain a group benefit. So what we know from earlier studies, or at least from this study, that dyads can outperform individuals in visual search tasks. What we were then interested was now what would happen if you increase the group size. So does the group benefit increase with group size? So do you get the same amount of benefit if you go from dyads to triads as when you go from an individual to a dyad? So we wanted to address now the triadic search case. We did this in the following experiment. So here what you see is the perspective from one participant. And what you see here is what this participant would see while performing a search task. What we changed in relation to like earlier studies was the following. So we had participants provided them with a spotlight where they could only see part of the screen for temporarily. And they could move the spotlight around the screen to perform the search task. So if they would move the spotlight, they could then check whether they currently see a target or distractor object. The target objects were still the same as in the Brennan study, and the distractors were still also these objects with those little antennas attached to it. We use these spotlights to be able to provide participants with the gaze information, so where the other people are currently looking, while performing a triadic search task and also a dyadic search task. So in the triadic search case, participants would then also see these outlines of spotlights that indicate where the co-actors are currently looking. So here you have the looking information available. Here's the same thing also shown from the other two participants. So you have your own spotlight and also the spotlights available from your co-actors. But of course, you cannot see what they're currently seeing. So you only know where they are looking. What you also have done in the study prior to performing any trials, participants would also get randomly assigned a symbol, and that has been used now to tell them in which condition they're performing this search task. So for instance, if they were performing the triadic search task, they would see this in the beginning. So they would know, okay, I'm going to perform the search now with two other people. So when they're now performing the search task, their task was to indicate whether a target was present or not. Mind again that they would still only have their spotlight available and information where the other people are looking. So they don't see the whole search display. The instruction was to perform the task as fast and as accurately as possible. Also, what's important is the first response would end the search. So if one of those three co-actors would push the button to say a target is present or a target is absent, then this would already end the trial. And after that, participants would then receive performance feedback and who pressed the button. Then we had also two other conditions, the dyadic search condition and the solitary search or solo search condition. The dyadic search condition, so basically everything remains here the same, but what changes is that you have different co-actors or different number of co-actors performing the task. Now what I wanted to say is, so that in the dyadic search condition, we had all possible combinations of dyad pairings from this triad here. So you had those two performing the search task together, those two, and also the outer two. And of course, everyone performed also solo searches. Now, if equipped with this paradigm, when you then want to ask whether there's a group benefit present or not, you first need to ask how to assess even group benefits. So one common measure in the literature is called a collective benefit. So this one is defined in the following way. So the group outperforms its best member. And in principle, it can be attained without collaboration among group members. So the collaboration here, I mean, the participants may attain a collective benefit even if they do not divide the labor. So how do you now assess a collective benefit? You can do this in the following way. For the visual search task, you can take the fast individual search time, so the best member in the diet group, and divide it by the diet. And you get a ratio then when a ratio, and if it's above 1, then this would indicate that there is a collective benefit. You can do something analogous for the triads by taking the fastest diet pairing in a triad and divide it by the triad. So again, you get ratios for your collective benefit. Now, if you use the collective benefit, as I said, there's one problem. You do not know whether co-actors actually collaborated. So in other words, divided labor in this task. So there's a need for another group benefit criterion, which we call the collaborative benefit. So here the baseline changes. So it's not the best member to which you compare the group performance. Now it's a non-collaborative group. So this collaborative benefit can only be attained if group members actually collaborate. So what you now would do in the visual search task case, you take the actual search time by the group and compare it to an independent search time. This independent search time you actually just experienced. So when you do the Waldo search, when you did the Waldo search in the beginning, you are essentially independently performing the search task. So you did not talk with each other to divide the labor, and you had no way of knowing what the other people in the Zoom were currently doing. So this is in essence this independent search time. And we simulated this in this particular study, and we know from an earlier study that the simulation very well approximates the actual independent search time that participants would obtain if they search independently. If you now look at the results, I'm plotting here now the collective benefit for the diets. So these ratios that I just explained. What we find is now that diets attain a collective benefit. So we replicate the findings by Brennan et al. If we look now at the collective benefit for the trials, we also find a group benefit, but this group benefit is greatly reduced in comparison to the diets. So here in conclusion, diets and trials attain a collective benefit, but the benefit for trials is lower than for diets. It does not scale up with the group size. If we now look at the collaborative benefit, so the second group benefit criterion I introduced, we find the following results. So first of all, what you see is the actual search times by the diets, and here the simulated search time. And what we find is that the actual search time is much lower than those simulated independent search times or the Waldo search times. So they do attain a collaborative benefit. Also for the trials, we find the same results, so they also attain a collaborative benefit. So what we know from this now is diets and trials benefit because they collaborate. So it's not just a collective benefit without any collaboration. They actually divided labor in this particular task. And we also looked at the questionnaires and found that participants also described that they use like these labor division strategies. We next asked then, how efficiently do diets and trials collaborate? So how well did they divide the labor? To assess this question, we came up with the following measure. So we took the whole space that is searched by, for instance, in this example, a diet, and we take the space that is searched redundantly, so indicated here, and we divide these two variables. What we get now is the fraction of overlap, which is a measure how efficiently they divide the labor. So the lower the overlap, the better the labor division. If we now look at the fraction of overlap as a function of the diets and triads and also target absent and present, we find that the diets are actually much more efficient in dividing the labor than the triads. So the triads search more redundantly than the dyads, in other words. So what we find here is now, as I said before, so the dyads and triads do device division of labor strategies. So we know that from questionnaires, but we now also know that dyads are more efficient than triads when performing the search task together. We next asked then, do co-actors distribute the labor in line with their individual search abilities? So that's what I was talking about when I showed you this initial search display. So what you see now here is the fraction of the searched area for the faster individual member and the slower individual member. So based on the individual or solo search times. So if co-actors would now divide it in line with their skill, then you would expect that the faster member takes a larger search space. But what you actually find here is that there's sort of an equality bias. So you tend to divide it more in halves or equally when you're in a dyad. Now, if you look at the triads and make the same computations, you find that they actually divide it more in line with the individual skills. So the fastest member is taking a larger search space than the middle and the slowest member. So in conclusion, dyads tend to distribute the labor equally, whereas triads distribute it more in line with the group members' individual capacities. We think what's going on here is that participants in a dyad tend to approach a search in a more systematic way. So one is taking the left side and one is taking the right side, for instance. And in a triadic case, at least based on our questionnaires, it seems to be the following case, that participants search more chaotically, so that they basically try to avoid where the other members in the group are currently looking. If you follow such an avoid strategy, then you actually use more of your individual capacities as a comparison to dyads. However, also keep in mind the dyads are still more efficient in dividing the labor. So so that's what I want to say. Now I want to wrap up this first study. So here's an intermediate summary. So the initial question was, does the group benefit increase with group size? So the answer is yes. So triads outperform dyads in a joint visual search task. We also find that group members collaborate. So they distribute the labor using information about the other's search locations. So in the same way as in the initial Brennan study. But what we also find is the benefit does not scale up. So there are smaller additional benefits for triads, potentially due to a less efficient division of search space. But we also find this now that dyads also tend to distribute the labor equally, whereas triads distribute it more in line with their members' individual search abilities. As a quick note, why there's a less efficient division of search space? It's potentially due to the higher coordination demands that you have now in the triads. So one big point of this paper is also that as you increase the group size, you of course also increase the coordination demands to divide the labor. This wraps up the first study. Now going back to these initial examples, I want to now move to a different task. So one that is a bit similar to the task that air traffic controllers need to perform. So they need to coordinate air traffic jointly by tracking the movements of several planes on computer screens. So a task that is a bit similar to this air traffic controller task is called a multiple object tracking task. It's a bit, if you want to have a real life example of this object tracking task, other than the air traffic controller's task, it would be something like this, where someone is hiding a marble under a cup and then quickly swaps around those cups. This is essentially very similar to object tracking task. And you need to, of course, keep track where the marble is now located. In the multiple object tracking task, you have now several marbles to keep track of and several cups available. This multiple object tracking task has been investigated a lot now for individuals, but here we investigated in a joint case, so in a collaborative case. And we did this now in this first study in the following way. So participants would first see target indications. So these are the marbles, and it always were 6. And now they could freely choose how much objects they want to track or how much targets they want to track. And then they would start to randomly move across the screen for several seconds. In this period, of course, participants still need to keep track of those target objects. After objects stop moving, participants could then individually, so each on their own, select those objects that they think are the target objects. After they log in their selections, they get now, in one of our experiments, selection information. So what targets have been selected by each of the co-actors. So they would see now their own selections, here indicated in blue, and also the selections by their co-actor. In a different experiment, instead of having those target selections available, they would receive performance feedback. So how much of their selections were now correct or incorrect. So they could with +1 point for each correct selection and -1 point for each incorrect selection. Then we also introduced here a team score that is now a combined score of the individual scores. There's one important rule for the team score. When you track the same or have overlapping correct selection, then it counts only 1 point to your team performance. So if you track the same thing correctly, it only gets you 1 extra point, not 2 points. This is a bit similar to the visual search case where you would search the same space redundantly. So if you do the same work twice, this is not awarded in the team score. Now, if you, in the third experiment, participants would get both types of information. So first the selection information and then the feedback information. And the instruction for all experiments was to maximize the team score. Then we asked for this particular experiment, do diets attain a collaborative benefit? And if so, how quickly? And to address these results, we now look at this following data plots. So what you see now here is the performance in points as a function of the trials. And the two most important lines here are the simulated independent performance. So this is again the Waldo performance, so the non-collaborative group, and the actual team performance, so the team score that participants attained. And the shaded areas now indicate where there are significant cluster permutation tests that compare these two lines with each other. So essentially, the shaded areas tell you where a collaborative benefit is significantly attained. And for the first experiment, you find that it happens now after around 40 tries on average. Then for the second experiment, when you have performance feedback, you also take several tries to attain a collaborative benefit. Now, interestingly, if you have both types of information available, you attain a collaborative benefit much more quickly. So you can use these both types of information, the target selections and the performance feedback together to more quickly devise labor division strategies. So in other words, these two types of information provide complementary parts of information about your partner that help you to make these labor divisions more quickly. So in conclusion here, diets attained a collaborative benefit, and they earliest attained it when receiving both types of information. Now we ask how did co-actors actually collaborate now in this multiple object tracking task? And what they primarily used was a left and right division of labor. So what I mean by that, when you see those initial targets displayed, one co-actor would take the leftmost targets or track the leftmost targets, and the other co-actor would track the rightmost targets. What we then asked in the next study was, is this strategy actually optimal? So there's findings on the individual tracking ability that may suggest that this might be not the optimal labor division strategy. So what an earlier study by Alvarez and Kavanagh has found was the following. So if you use an object tracking task that is a bit different, so you have like these quadrants here in which you need to track objects and note that the objects cannot move out of these quadrants, then participants attain a higher performance, a tracking performance, when they track objects across the visual fields. So if they have objects in the left and the right visual field to track. In comparison, if they only would track objects within one visual field. So Actually, so here you have apparently more attentional capacities available than when you track only within one visual field. Right. So if we now go back to this left-right division example that we attained in the earlier study, then, and if we would now put in these quadrants, then it actually looks like the participants do not use their labor division or their attentional capacities optimally. So essentially, each co-actor tends to track objects within only one visual field. Keep in mind also, or that I haven't mentioned, those objects do not move that far away from the initial starting positions. So they largely still remain in the same quadrants. So a more optimal strategy could be an up-down strategy, actually. So if they want to make use of more attentional resources, so the members of the team, then it would be actually better to have one co-actor track the upper targets and one co-actor the lower targets, because you now track objects across visual fields. So now we wondered, why do participants use the left-right labor division strategy and not an up-down strategy? We investigated this now using the following two factors. So one factor was the seating arrangement. So we had other questionnaires where participants were saying, I was sitting on the left, so of course I took the left side. So it might be that the seating arrangement might already bias participants towards a particular labor division strategy. The other factor was the screen shape. So we always use these rectangle screen shapes, and that might bias participants also to take a left and right strategy. So we now investigated these two factors and two experiments. So the first experiment varied the seating positions. So they either sat next to each other or opposite of each other. And again, we took this these quadratic or these quadrant displays that also were used by the study by Alvarez and Kavanagh for this study. And here we wanted to investigate whether the seating position affects the labor division. In the second experiment, we varied the shape of how we displayed the task. So we had the vertical display and the horizontal display. And here we wanted to investigate whether the display shape affects now the division of labor strategy. The experiment was, or the trial was designed in the following way. So we had two conditions. One was called the fixed condition. And in this condition, or before participants even perform a trial, they were assigned one color, so either green or yellow. And we used this color now to indicate in which quadrants they should track objects. So what you see here, for instance, is that the two left quadrants are colored in green and the two right quadrants are colored in yellow. So here we predetermine the labor division strategy by saying you should now use a left-right labor division strategy. But we had also an up-down labor division strategy, have them perform them in separate trials. Apart from that, it's still a normal or regular multiple object tracking task. So you have your target indications, then the objects move, and then you need to select those objects that you think are the target objects. And the goal here now of this condition is to see whether the earlier findings by Alvarez and Kavanagh can be replicated. So you would have a higher performance actually for an up-down strategy than a left-right strategy. Then we had also a free choice condition. So here participants could freely choose in which quadrants they want to track those objects. So here it's all about knowing about the strategy preference. So do they prefer a left-right labor division strategy or an up-down labor division strategy? Apart from that, the rest in the trial is still the same. If we now look at the results, so here I show you the fixed condition, here the free choice condition, here the different seating arrangements, and here the performance in points, and here the proportions that I selected. Now, if we look at the performance separately for the division of labor strategies, we find actually that they attain a higher performance for an up-down labor division strategy. So in essence, we find that participants are better with an up-down strategy than with a left-right labor division strategy. So we replicate those earlier findings by Alvarez and Kavanagh. Now, if we look at the strategy choices, we actually also find the participants prefer an up-down labor division strategy. So in line with this performance advantage, they also choose the correct strategy. And actually the seating arrangement had no effect on whether you're biased towards the left-right labor division strategy. So here's also this clear preference for an up-down labor division. So what we essentially find here is the seating positions had no effect on performance and the division of labor. So co-workers use actually division of labor that maximizes the use of their individual attentional capacities. Now, if we look at the second experiment where we varied the monitor shape, so I'm essentially showing you the same data, or the same plots, but now with this different factor here. So the vertical shape display and here the horizontal shape display. If you look at the performance, you find that for the vertical display, you still have this up-down performance advantage. However, this disappears or becomes greatly reduced for the horizontal display. So actually the earlier findings by Alvarez and Kaufmann seem to be modulated by the display shape. So the earlier findings are only true actually for a vertical display or a quadratic display, but they're no longer applied to horizontal displays. If you now then look at the free choice condition, we actually find now that participants also adapt their strategy choices in line with the display in which they are performing their object tracking task. So for the vertical display, they have this clear up-down preference, but for the horizontal display, it's basically 50-50. So we also find that the strategy choice is affected by display shape. So in essence, so whenever there's a performance advantage for a particular display shape, participants are sensitive to it and use their according labor division strategy. So the conclusion here is the display shape affected both the performance and the strategy preference. Sorry. So co-workers use a division of labor that maximizes the use of additional individual attentional capacity. So you might wonder, so what happened in the earlier studies, so where they always used the left and right labor division strategy, or at least for the majority of pairs. Well, in this study, we even used the wider width for our horizontal displays, and we think that would bias participants even more towards a left-right labor division strategy. So here's essentially 50-50, but we would use a larger width than participants likely would take now in left-right division labor strategy also in this particular study. Now, until this point, I've presented to you results all on human-human interactions, so labor division strategies. But what now would happen if you actually exchange one of the co-actors by a computer partner? So you would now perform this object tracking task with a computer partner. So what we ask here is now, are humans actually willing to share task load with a computer partner? So do they actually want to divide the labor with a computer partner? What we varied here are two factors. So one factor was the description of the computer partner that participants received prior to working together with the computer partner, or prior to doing the multiple object tracking task together with the computer. So one description was machine-like. So we said participants, the computer has been designed to behave in a machine-like way. Specifically, its behavior has been modeled to be algorithmic and artificial. In the other description, the computer told participants the following sentences. So the computer partner has been designed to behave in a human-like way. So specifically, we took data from human participants when they performed this tracking task together and used this data to model the behavior of the computer partner. So in essence, they had these two different types of descriptions available. And it was a between subject design, of course. Then what we also varied was the behavior of the computer partner. So one behavior was human-like. So participants or the computer was using actually a left and right labor division strategy. And I want to emphasize here, we use those rectangular shaped monitors that we used in our initial studies. So there's a clear preference for left and right labor division strategies for humans for this particular setup. Then, as a non-human-like behavior, we let the computer perform an up-down labor division strategy. So the computer was consistently always tracking the upper targets or always consistently tracking the lower targets. And we varied this also across in the between subject design. If we now, so we have these two factors, so the description and the actual behavior of the computer partner. And what we now find when we look at whether participants attain or collaborative benefits, or in other words, are willing to share the task load, we find that only if you provide a human-like description beforehand, and the computer also shows a human-like behavior, then you find a collaborative benefit. For all the other combinations, there's no collaborative benefit attained, at least in a consistent manner across several trials. So the conclusion here is humans share task load with a computer partner if they believe that it acts human-like. So it needs to be human-like in their behavior, but also you need to require a prior belief that it will act human-like. So this concludes this last study, and I want to now summarize all what I've told you so far. So in the beginning, I said we coordinate our actions to attain a shared goal. And often when we coordinate our actions, we do this by dividing the labor. And in this talk, now I told you, showed you several factors that now influence these labor division strategies. So one factor that we investigated at the beginning was the group size. So here we actually found now that with increasing group size, you get less of a group benefit, and also how you divide the labor. So whether it's individual in line with individual research abilities or not is influenced by the group size. So for diets, you had this equality bias, but for trials, it was no longer present. Then I showed you that labor divisions, so how quickly you devise those labor divisions or strategies depends on the information that you receive. So if you receive performance feedback and or information about the co-actors' selections in this multiple object tracking task, then you're faster when you receive these complementary types of information. Then I showed you that participants are also sensitive to change in the environment, particularly the screen shape. So if the screen shape changes your performance on a particular object tracking task, then they adapt their strategies accordingly. So these strategies, these left-right division labor strategies, are not set in stone. They are malleable to these changes in the environment. However, the seating arrangement had here no effect. Then if you actually want to divide the labor now with a computer partner, it appears to be very important that your prior beliefs appear to be very, very important about the computer partner. So you actually only attain a collaborative benefit here, or you're willing to divide the labor if you think that the computer will behave in a human-like way. And also the computer needs to behave in a human-like way on top of that. With that, I listed now several of these factors, and that already concludes my talk. I see that I'm a bit early on time, but yeah, I'm happy now to take questions, and want you to thank you for your attention, my collaborators, and also my funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Basil. This is amazing. Also, I remember some of these studies while I was your EV, so it refreshes a lot of the projects together. Okay, so we have questions already. Arthur?
So, hey, Basil, my first question is to the first part, but actually it's also to the second part in general. So the question is about generalizability of the studies that you perform, because you start with a nice intro about searching, then you convert that into experimental design on screens with circles and tiny lines. And we had some ideas here in Osnabrück after some time to move with such a studies into VR experiments.
Okay,
do you think that such a search visual tasks, also in a dyadic setups, are interesting, and whether the VR setups could bring something new into the knowledge that we have about division of labor.
Definitely. So at least in the, so I spent some time at the UPC at the Brain Bar Lab, and one major point about this lab was how easily do effects break outside of the lab. So how important, so very big emphasis was put on using testing effects in the lab in the wild, and he was actually, so the PI of the lab, moving into this direction of testing that in a VR setting to at least make it more realistic, more wild. So I feel it's definitely important to try that out already, because you have also the 3D perspective. So all these tasks are performed on a 2D screen. So it might already be a factor that affects how you divide the labor. So if you have the depth information also available, or you have, I don't know, maybe there are individual differences that you are better at perceiving people in the front versus to the back or something. There are all these factors that come into play that you do not have when you just look at the screen. So there, it's totally worthwhile to test that. And also to your, maybe relatedly to your point, it's also worthwhile to test it in these labor division preferences also in other tasks. So I've shown you like visual search and multiple object tracking tasks. So these are spatial attention tasks, but depending on the task, like if you, I don't know, use a memory task, how you divide words that you need to remember. If you take a problem solving task, then there are other factors that come into play. So if you look there at the literature, people find different things that play a huge role. So what I've said today is definitely applies to, yeah, spatial attention, but it might be a different game once you move to a different cognitive domain.
Nice, thank you a lot. So maybe stay tuned because we are just starting a project like that right now here in Osnabrück. So we moved to the VR exactly visual search task, the same as you presented. But
Perfect.
with virtual reality, and everything is ready. So we are gonna start to measuring soon. So maybe by the end of this year, we can update you more on the 3D results on exactly the same type of task.
Yeah, that sounds exciting. Yeah, I want to know everything.
Okay, I will let other ask question now.
Thanks, Arthur. Vincent?
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. I have a question with regards to the task performance more.
Yeah.
So did you look into also the individual performance of the people that performed this dyadic task? Like as a simple visual search task, that they did it also individually?
Yes, we had also these solo performances available. And we always use them as a baseline for the collective benefits. So to even be able to assess it. So without these, so these conditions were essential to even draw any conclusions about the group benefits. So we looked at this, yeah.
Okay, then I would be interested, was it more predictive how well individuals performed? So basically how good their skills are in performing those search tasks, or was it more something that depended more on strategy or some other factors?
That's a very good question. So we had included in this paper also a model to predict the collective benefit. And we had several predictors there included. And some predictors were all about like the coordination, so how well you divide the labor, so the efficiency of the coordination. And then we had predictors that are solely based on the individual search abilities. And we actually find that both of them explain sizable portions of the variance. So for instance, one predictor was how similar well are your individual search abilities. So if they're relatively similar, then the extent of the group benefit is larger. And yeah, and another predictor was also this independent search time. So this was also just solely based on the individual search abilities, and that also predicted the sizable portion of the variance. So I would say it's half and half. So if you bring, so your individual search abilities help already, but also what you do then with those when you coordinate also plays a big role. So it's both. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I have a follow-up question to this.
Yeah.
Would you say that depending, so more related to the strategy choice that's implemented by the diet. Can high-performing diets be outperformed by, in tendency, lower-performing diets by adapting a certain strategy? So by collaborating in a more effective way, can that increase the performance so significantly that they, just by adapting the strategy, outperform people that were in the baseline more effective in performing the task?
We haven't looked at this, but in principle, this would be possible. So if you, so one thing that the diets didn't do that well was to divide the labor in line with their individual searchability. So they divided it in halves. But if you now instruct one particular diet, which is not performing that well, I don't know, with colors on the screen, we know you're that good, please take that part, and we know you're that good, please this search space, then I think it could be possible then to have a diet which is better as it, or that produces a better diet performance than actually a diet where there are better individual members. So the coordination or to the degree how well you coordinate may make you a better diet than a higher individual diet or a diet better based on the individual performances. So I feel, yeah, that could be possible.
Yeah, super interesting. Thanks a lot. The reason I was asking this is because we previously investigated with an IQ test. We investigate people individually and then we put them together in groups. And basically what came out of the reciting model was that the highest performing individual was pretty much predicting the entire performance of the group, which apparently seems to be a thing with regards to IQ tests, especially if you put a time limit onto them. Yeah. You just have to know the answer. And if you have one person in your team that knows the answer, it's completely sufficient. While with more collaborative tasks, it gets way more complicated and a lot of other factors come into play. So,
yeah, interesting. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why people tend to use the collective benefits. So always compare the group performance relative to the best member to have this, to control for the situation where one person dominates the group performance. So that's the reason for that. But yeah, for like this problem-solving task, it's often about also complementary skills. So in these spatial attention tasks, how similar individual searchabilities are play a big role. But if it's about knowledge, then it's all about complementary skill sets. So yeah, I don't know if that played a role, but there's at least, depending on the task, this major difference. Yeah, well, but thanks for the questions, very interesting.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Vincent. So we have the next question from Yasmin.
Yeah, so I want to ask a little bit about something different related to joint actions. I'm not sure if maybe Fabert wants to go first, if it's directly connected. No? Okay. Okay, so I was wondering about what you basically presented today were like about like task division, right? So and the gain was if people were faster than being alone, or like groups are faster than being alone. And I was just wondering, because in everyday life we quite often have more the aspect of task sharing, so you do a task together because you enjoy it more. And so I was just wondering if you're interested in, or if you know about research where it is more about a positive benefit on like an emotion on emotion. So is there a benefit due to shared task on emotion? And for example, because people are successfully communicating or successfully connecting with others, and how is that in joint action research?
I've only one study that comes to mind. So it was by Ariana Coriglioni, I think is her name. I don't know if I pronounced it correctly, but she looked at two conditions where you have you either could perform a joint action or you perform it on your own, if I remember correctly. And actually doing a joint action is the bad choice because from an economic perspective, because it's much harder to do. But they investigated whether participants would still then prefer a joint action, presumably because of those benefits that you have, so that you just feel better together, so that you are it's more fun to do a joint action than actually do the task alone. So I think the experiment was not too exciting. So I think then in the sense that the joint actions seem to be a good choice to have a more exciting time in the time you perform this experiment. So that's one study I know of. But yeah, I can definitely imagine that it's simply more fun to do a task together than doing it alone, especially in these lab setups where you perform many tries at the same time. So it's definitely an interesting research question to pursue, just to test what are participants willing to do in a joint action, even though it might not be the best move compared to performing the same task alone. So I don't know if that helps. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I will look into the study, try to find it. Thanks.
Thanks, Esme. Herbert, please go on.
So my question is a bit on the curious side and the niche one maybe on your study where you have the dyadic between human and the machine. It was interesting that you said that they have a definition that the machine will behave human-like or machine-like, but you said that only the benefit is visible when the machine actually behaves like a human and they're told so. And for me, it's really interesting to know why wasn't the case for when the machine still performed like a human, but they were not told so, because it's a little bit a stretch if the strategies are still the same. I assume that they would still gain some benefit.
Yeah, very good question. So yeah, the conditions were perceptually, in a sense, identical. So the computer partner was doing the same labor division. What we suggest what drive these effects is that participants, once they receive this description, they look more for the possible intention of the computer partner. So they look at these, when they see those selections, so they receive the selection information, what the computer has selected, they would then, at least based on their own knowledge, how they would perform the task, look for these patterns. So if there's a left and right label division or not. And we think is once they receive like this machine-like description, they just think, okay, this is a computer, this behavior will be totally algorithmic or artificial. I don't will assume that there's any intention in the actions that is in a way human-like, even though the computer is doing something human-like. However, I want to emphasize, so these are like the averaged results over all these participants, but there were definitely some participants in the machine-like description that also picked up on these patterns and saw, okay, the computer was following the strategy. So yeah, keep in mind, these are like these general patterns, but we had participants that picked up the left-right also in the machine-like description.
Thank you.
More questions? Peter.
Thanks. Hi, Basil. Great presentation. You showed early that the speed of coordination in the multiple object tracking task is increased if they have selection feedback as well as performance feedback. Super interesting. The asymptote, however, is rather similar. Insofar as the participants are somehow satisfied with the suboptimal performance, and often it's nice to describe behavior or physiological process in terms of normative models, so optimal in some way. So what are your ideas? Why are the subjects satisfied with suboptimal? Well, above they have a collaborative benefit, but suboptimal performance. Why don't they improve further on?
I have many or several suggestions here. So one is a bit fears there's a quality bias that you tend to divide the labor in halves for diets at least. I feel if they would divide it in line with their individual abilities, then they could attain a higher performance already. But yeah, it seems to be very strong in diets to, yeah, everyone takes one half. The other factor is there seems to be, so on the one hand, if you stick to one strategy, you are highly predictable. So, and that helps. So if you consistently always track the leftmost targets and the other ones always take the rightmost targets, you know what's going on. And you, I think the willingness to deviate from this or to modify this even further from an already well-working strategy, like the threshold to do this is relatively high. So participants, I think, once they have their strategy, they stick to it and do not strive to modify this further, because probably they do not want to risk making themselves unpredictable to a degree, so the other participants still needs to figure out something new. So I feel, yeah, that's like okay, we're happy with what we got, and we don't want to boost this further because this could actually break the strategy. So these are the two main ones. Then I feel one aspect is also that's often mentioned for group benefits is that of social loafing. So this is actually something that happens a lot in larger group sizes, so that the members do not perform to the best of their abilities, simply because there's a group, and if we are well performing, they kind of do not feel motivated to use all their available skills. So it could be also just a motivational factor that already could be present for the diets. So yeah, somewhere I have a document with more reasons, but these are the 3, 4 or so that I feel are the most probable ones.
Aspect. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
More questions? Okay, so we check again. Yeah, so since we don't have anyone on the queue, I would like to thank Basil again for his wonderful presentation and the wonderful discussion. And I would close the session now. Thank you again for being here.
Yeah, thank you for all the interesting questions and the invitation. I really enjoyed this. Thank you.